Greetings and welcome to You Are the Miracle podcast. I am Cheyenne Kramer. This is my better half.
Don Kramer. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing good tonight.
Absolutely. And, we come to you every week and we try to bring you stories and ideas that help you to understand that every single one of us, I believe, that's sitting on this planet right now has a gift to give to other people. There's something inside you. It may be something you've come through. It may be a talent or a gift that you have to give to the world. But everybody has something to give because we know that you are part of the miracle on this planet right now that could be helping others. So we are excited to have a special guest with us tonight. Gregory O. Proctor is a remarkable individual. He's a devoted Christian. He's an accomplished author. He's a managing director of Sketcher and host of the inspiring podcast, Cut to the Chase. And he has come through some major medical miracles he was just telling us a bit about. And, his story is all about resilience. He shares his wisdom through his work and inspiring others to embrace life's beauty and overcome the obstacles. So welcome, Gregory. We're so happy to have you with us tonight.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor to be on You Are a Miracle podcast. I certainly appreciate, the opportunity and look forward to diving in.
Well, good. Then let's do that because I know your story, kind of really cranks up somewhere during the whole COVID experience. So I'm just curious, what was your life like before all of this went down?
Well, as most people would say before COVID, I was an individual with many hats. I had quite a few endeavors going on at the time, several of which, actually people have become to know me by, one being, as you made note there in the introduction, Cut to the Chase podcast, which has been kind of, I've just been the voice behind Cut to the Chase. My wife was really kind of the brainchild, driving entity behind it, and we brought forth Cut to the Chase based on friends, family, professional colleagues talking about things that impact our ability to thrive. So really it falls right in line with You Are the Miracle podcast because, motivation, inspirational things are really what we gravitate towards. And then on top of that, we do it in such a way where we open up Pandora's box where we say there's an episode for everyone, which basically means that we allow for people, if you have a compelling story, to come on our podcast and really share something that's going to be authentic, something that's going to allow for you to be spiritually uplifted. It's going to nourish your soul. It's going to help bring forth that light, and so, my wife and I really enjoyed, recording those podcasts and literally I give her a lot of credit because she does all the work behind the scenes. And it's been something that has really been phenomenal, which has just been one dynamic of the hats that I wore before COVID happened. The other hat that I wore was obviously running my own project management company called Sketcher, where we supported, government and commercialized projects, kind of being the back office and really helping in the planning, scheduling, cost estimating, earned value management perspective. And that was primarily my career path for many, many years because it's allowed for me to basically work all over the world, which, as a part of that, I ended up in Peru where I met my lovely wife, which, that's, right now she's my angel. She's my champion, and I love her very much. The third hat that I was wearing was through a mobile app company, which a high school friend of mine, which, was my business partner, we were going off to develop through augmented reality. And that company was called TrueSpot, which basically allowed for fans to experience literally any type of concert or movie or any type of large gathering function from the comfort of their home without having to leave, and certainly having what I consider to be a butt in seat viewpoint of, any type of arena in the world. So, before COVID, I had a lot of things going on. It was an exciting time. And, the way my brain works, we were literally trying to get all of that off the ground and really move forward. And we had a lot of success up until the point, which I think where your next question is going to come in.
Well, and we've kind of become crusaders for entrepreneurs who end up with health challenges, because that was kind of what happened to him a number of years ago, not in the same sandbox as what you're going to tell us about, but you obviously have been a serial entrepreneur, which I think is awesome, and we love that. Yes. But how do we ever expect to get hit with a major medical diagnosis? So please share with us a little bit about your journey and how that all came down for you.
Well, I mean, for me, it was rather ironic because, as they always say, things happen for a reason. There's a purpose and there's a higher power for your calling. Sometime the message, that's delivered, the messenger becomes the message. And so in my case, I think the first thing that I learned when things were starting to hit me, and which I'll talk about what transpired, but I was recording, and we were recording podcasts. I mean, we got like 145 episodes out there already. A lot of people that still review our content today, they're like, man, this is great. I'm like, yeah, but that was recorded 3 years ago. I mean, we haven't recorded any new material in like 3 years. And it's great to hear that it still touches people's souls and gives them that uplift that they look for in life. But I recorded 2 podcasts literally maybe a month and a half or maybe 2 months before I was actually diagnosed with multiple myeloma cancer. And so what transpired is I had these 2 podcasts from 2 separate guests, which I talk about, we'll talk about this later in my book. But one guest, her mom, so she was a caregiver for her mom, and the other guest, her husband and the lady that I was on my program as the featured guest, they both had 2 separate blood cancers, and they fall into the same classification as multiple myeloma. So for me, I was starting to experience back pain. My wife and I, we were doing everything to kind of weather the storm. It was like, okay, at one point I was blaming the chair because I was sitting in the chair for so many hours because we were recording podcasts. We were trying to manage our other businesses and of course, trying to grow and scale at the same time. And we went through buying a new chair. We went through, all of the different aspects of stretching exercises and anything that I could do to prevent from going to the doctor. We were trying it. And then we just got to a point where my wife left the country. I was popping too many Tylenols and realized that something more severe is going on here. So at one point, and this is where it takes a very difficult turn in my life. At one point, I went to bed. I was already in pain, knowing that, hey, I'm going to hopefully try and sleep. But the following morning, I could not move my lower extremities. So from my waist down, I was literally paralyzed.
Wow.
And at that point, I said to myself, okay, Lord, I need you right now. Whatever's going on, I need you right now. Mm-hmm. So I immediately called my wife after, trying to say a prayer and figure out, my legs are there. Why can't I move them? I called my wife and she said, look, stop kidding with me. I'm down here in Peru. I'm trying to take care of my family. We got all of this crazy stuff going on with COVID. And she said, if you're really serious, then you need to get to the doctor. And I said, well, how am I going to do that? I literally couldn't walk, So, to kind of fast track this a little bit, me being prior military, I just rolled out of the bed and started the army crawl with my elbows, to get to places that I could possibly try and pull myself up. And I called my primary healthcare doctor and said, look, I'm on the way. This is what's going on. He said, yeah, sounds like you may have a slip disc or you may have this or, pull muscle. And I told him, I said, I believe it's something more severe. I get to him after doing some things that I probably shouldn't have done, like, drive myself and, crawl to the car. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All of these things that I shouldn't have done, on my own, I managed to try to muster up the courage and pull the inner strength together to be able to do it. I finally get there, and of course, there's no parking close to the door, and I have to walk, or crawl from about 80 yards away just to get into the office. Finally, get into the office, and I just grab onto the receptionist desk and I say, "Look, I need to see Dr. Gogu right now. I mean, there's no waiting." So they get me back, and he starts pushing around, and he hits that one spot on my upper right hip. And I just said, "Jiminy Crickets, please don't do that again, or I'm going to have to punch you." So, anti-inflammatory shots, pain-killing shots, x-rays, this, that, and the other. The drugs helped numb the pain, dulled it, for a period of time. But by the time I got back home, far as I could go was my couch or my sofa. I stayed there for the next 48 hours, managed to crawl and do the necessities that I had to do. But I knew I had to see someone else. And the following Monday, I saw someone else. And that's where it all took, the turn for the worse.
Wow. Holy cow. Yeah. And I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm sure that you've got multiple stories about some of the things that you've been through. I can't begin to imagine, but would love to hear, how, I mean, you've come a long way. Are you considered actually in remission at this time?
Yes, I am actually in remission, fairly deep remission. I mean, I've been consecutively cleared since about October of 2021, which, in order to connect the dots for your audience, after I saw the following specialist, which was a spine management specialist, I went through 2 series of MRIs. By this time, my wife had gotten back into town because I was giving her updates, and she was like, "All right, this can't be as serious as you're projecting." And when she saw me, I was like hobbling, I mean, it wasn't even stable. I probably should have been walking on a cane or, a walker, because that's how wobbly I was based on the overall pain. By the time we got the second MRI results back and she was there, I originally went back with the spine management specialist, and he said, "Look, I only want to say this once. You need to get your wife back here and, let's have this conversation." And I was thinking to myself, like, this is not good, because on the first MRI, even though they had identified something, in that area, they basically said, "Well, we don't know if it's benign or cancerous." Well, when I went back for the second MRI, we did it with contrast. And at that point in time, everything was glowing. And so, of course, we knew. And so he said to us, "Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, I'm just going to be very clear and transparent. Go find an oncologist right now." And you start thinking, like, is this a Monopoly game? Don't pass go. You don't collect $200. I mean, all these crazy things are going through your mind, because it's like, is this for real? Because it's just like, can't we just take something and hopefully that this will go away? I mean, that's kind of where my mind was, because I just felt like, okay, yeah, I've dealt with a lot of pain. I've been athletic. I've been hurt. I've been this. I've been that. Let's just try and move beyond this. And he said, this is not that. We've identified that it is, he didn't actually say it was cancerous, but you could see it in his eyes based on the severity. And so we spent like the next, 24, maybe 48 hours calling around, because no one wanted to see me. I mean, it was just that bad. And we fought like crazy. And finally, when we found an oncologist, she was like a bulldog in a china shop, just, ready to get after it, just kind of tear everything down. And so when we met with her, she basically said, "Okay, I've got the preliminary results. However, we need to run you through all these series of tests, and we need to get it done within the next 48 hours. And so I was like, "Well, what does these tests consist of?" And so she's like, "Well, it's going to be plenty of blood work. There's going to be scans. There's going to be PET scans. There's going to be bone marrow biopsies. There's going to be all these things." And I'm thinking, like, man, I've never experienced this much medical procedure on my body ever. So we go through all of this, and we get to the bone marrow biopsy, And and for me, I was just like, man, I don't wish this procedure on anybody. I mean, they literally stick like a 6-inch needle into your hip area and extract your bone marrow out. And it is, even local anesthesia is painful. And I've had 4 of them. Of course, the first 2 that I've had, I basically said, you guys will never do this to me again while I'm awake. You guys will have to put me asleep, knock me out, because I don't want to feel this pain. So we went through all these series of tests, went back into my oncologist like on a Friday. You know, something about Fridays now that are very significant in my life. We went back in on a Friday, and she had all of this paperwork, and she said, okay, I want you 2 to sit down. We're going to talk about this. I've kind of cleared my schedule because I know what I'm about to tell you is pretty shocking. She went on to say, okay, you've got multiple myeloma, IgA kappa, P17 deletion, 2 submutated genes. You've got this going on. You have 100% bone lesions throughout your body. So long story short, to kind of summarize this, I was high risk, which meant that they could not delay the consequence of starting my treatment as soon as possible. As soon as I would agree to start my treatment, they were literally like, okay, let's get you into, you know, the chemo treatment room like right away. So not only did I have this tumor that had protruded through, you know, my tissue in my upper right hip area, but I had lactate lesions throughout my entire rib cage and spine, where, you know, at one point, well, I won't say at one point, and in the very early stages, not only did I have the pain in my upper right hip area going across my sciatic nerve, but also the disease had fractured my stirrup. And so I could not sleep horizontal because of the pressure from breathing that was on my chest. It felt like what I talk about in my book, like an 800-pound gorilla beating on you, you know. And so even putting on my shoes, getting dressed, and all other extremities, I required assistance, you know, a lot of it, because, you know, here it was being a guy that was very independent most of my life and having the rug pulled from underneath me and realizing the consequences of needing others to support me was very surreal to me. I mean, it was something that was very hard for me to cope with early on in life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I can get that. Holy cow. Wow. So it sounds like they didn't think your prognosis was all that good right from the beginning.
Well, the thing is where it really hit home, and where, you know, like I said, you know, things happen for a reason, and you begin to feel like, okay, this is just too surreal, is where, you know, all those things my doctor was telling my wife and I, we were just looking at her like, okay, so what is that? You know, I mean, it's like, you know, she said cancer, but I'm thinking like, okay, so what type of cancer? Can you go in? Can you remove it? And this, that, you know, she's like, no, this is a blood cancer. And, you know, we'll have to talk about all these other things later that you're going to have to endure. But this is not something that it's going to be an easy journey. And the fact that she said, you know, she said one thing that was really significant, but it was really 2. The first thing that she said was, this is kind of an incurable disease. It's treatable, but it's incurable. So that kind of marinated in my brain, and I said, okay, all right. But the second thing she said really shook me to the core. And I know it shook my wife to the core, because as we walked out of the consultation trying to keep ourselves strong and not cry and all these other things, it was appalling just to hear these words. This was on a Friday, and she said, Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, which every time somebody calls us that, it's like, you know, we tend to believe that it's like bad news. It's like, call us by our names.
Please. Yeah.
She said to us, go home and get your affairs in order. And that was something that my wife looked at me, and me trying to, you know, compose myself, thinking like, am I going to die? Because that was like the first thing that came to my mind. If you're telling me something like that, you know, am I going to die? So it was silence in the car. We came home, didn't say much, sat down on the couch, kind of consoled each other. And, that weekend for us it was difficult. It was difficult to bear because we knew we were walking into something that personally I'd never experienced. I didn't have any education or knowledge of what was going to happen, let alone, what does chemo do to you? They throw so much paperwork at you and expect you to kind of digest all this stuff, but yet you're still your cognitive functionality of, dealing with the anxiety and dealing with the uncertainty. I mean, that's consuming you. I mean, you're within the first, few days of this. You're so consumed. So we come home, and finally, by the time we kind of, cry and, console each other, I think by Sunday, I looked at her and I said, okay, look, whatever it takes, I am not going to leave you. And of course, the situation was very vast. I mean, it was pretty bleak in the early stages. I said, I'm not going to leave you. I said, we've got to figure out how to try and weather the storm on this and see the other side. Of course, not knowing all of the things that we need to know, which eventually we finally checked into getting our own PhD. But that first week was something like, it's like sitting in a chair and you have all of these drugs and chemicals running through your body, and you're on this psychedelic trip, and you're up and down, and you're like riding this roller coaster that never ends. And of course, by the time it does end, 6 or 8 hours later, in my case, you feel like you've just gone through some type of zombie apocalyptic, because you are out of your mind, you're out of your cognitive, capability, the physical aspect. I mean, it just really messes with you when you've never experienced anything like this. And it's like, wow, how am I going to function? Because for the first 3.5 months of dealing with this disease, I was on chemo Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 hours per day. That was my full-time job.
Wow. I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. Holy macaroni.
Yeah. And not only that, dealing with the aspect of, when do we start to see, progress in the treatment, because, with the drugs that they were putting through my system, every week, we're taking labs, we're looking at, the blood count. We're looking at, particularly in the blood count, we're looking for what they call the M spike, which is the protein level in your bloodstream. And not only look at the bloodstream, but they also look at the urine, because my protein count in my body based on the disease, because the disease produces a protein that the body can't use, it was literally off the charts, which was making me so sick and so ill and causing all of these other issues that was going on. I was fortunate enough, not to have other, organs in my body be disrupted by the disease, which was a good thing, which meant that I was going into my overall cancer treatment pretty much on the right side of the fence without having to deal with kidney failure, renal failure, or some of the other things that typically happen. So I was fortunate and blessed to be in that, circumstance. But, the mental aspect, the physicality, the financial toxicity that went along with it, dealing with the insurance companies, and just all of these things combined just became just a tsunami that, came over my wife and I, and we were just like, man, how do we manage to get through this? Because we were burning $22,500 a week.
Oh, wow.
And at the point in time that my insurance company decided that they were going to kind of, be wishy-washy about paying my doctor, I had already accumulated $250,000. And my doctor's like, Mr. Proctor, we're going to have to stop your treatment because your insurance company hasn't paid. And so, as I said, cognitive functions and, the ability to kind of think clearly, most times when you go through medical procedures, particularly if they knock you out, they say, you're not to drive, you're not to sign any documents, you're not to do all these different things. Well, for me, I had to come home and get on the phone, in the afternoons and be on the phone for however many hours before my insurance companies close to just deal with what the, are you guys doing? I mean, release payment, well, we have to do this. We have to do that. I'm thinking to myself, like, no, I've been on treatment for this much time and you haven't paid. I mean, so for me, it was like, wanting to kind of wring someone's neck and say, as a cancer patient, just trying to think about survivalship, no one should ever have to go through this. In which, as I went through all of the ups and downs and tribulations that I went through, the one thing that really kind of resonated, as I've explained to people before, is it was humbling, because in the midst of how my life was before and then going into the early phases of the cancer diagnosis, it was chaos. And so, someone, namely a higher power, was like, if you're not going to settle down and focus on the things I need for you to focus on, well, these are the things that I'm going to, put in place that will slow you down. And trust me, it slowed me down to where, for a guy that has, a lot of passion and determination and just, pure resiliency, and determination to get things done, I couldn't do it.
Right.
I couldn't do it. Think about not being able to tie your shoes. How many people take that for granted when your physicality is good, putting on your pants, and putting on your shirt and clothes. I mean, just doing that independent, just the little simple things was nil to me. I couldn't do it. I mean, with my stirrup being fractured, with the pain in my upper hip, I mean, I was like borderline, whatever you can think of, I mean, I was right there on the hairy edge. And, and for me, I knew that if, and it wasn't even about if, I prayed about this and said, let me get to the other side. Let me surrender and use me and guide me in any capacity that you see fit. And, I made it my mission, that one, I needed to basically get myself educated and my wife educated. And two, I needed to ensure that since multiple myeloma impacts the African-American community probably by a factor of 5 or 10x more than any other ethnic group, I was saying to myself, we've got to be aware of this disease. And a lot of people were like, well, just go have it cut out. Just have this done. Just have that. I'm like, guys, wait a minute. This is a blood cancer. I mean, I can't do that. I've got to go through a process, and I've got to trust that process in order for me to survive. And just to kind of give you an idea, that process of going through all of the chemo treatment, finally achieving remission in October of 2021, and then starting to get prepared for my stem cell transplant, that process in itself was like going through, and being in a clinical trial almost, because, you're going to get tested and retested and tested again, multiple times. And, the fact that I was dealing with, my insurance company, and I was denied by the VA in the beginning, and trying to, get them to approve, everything. It was just one hurdle after the next, throughout the entire first 6 months of, dealing with everything that we were dealing with. And it was very much a, like I said, mental and physical roller coaster, because, we had to do things that was creative and outside of the box, and think about, how do we survive this and come out on the other side without all this financial burden that was going to be, loaded in on top of us. The average cost to go through a stem cell transplant is about $1 million.
Whoa.
Wow.
And
crazy.
And in my case, I've exceeded that by a factor of almost 3x. I'm sitting at about 2.75 million right now today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unreal. So you've not only gone through the trauma of the physical and emotional challenges, but you've also had to experience how broken the dang systems are.
Definitely broken.
Oh
Yeah.
my
It's a
goodness.
shame.
Government, again,
oh,
go ahead, Don. Go ahead, Don.
it's a shame that the government doesn't step up for veterans more than they do.
He's a veteran as well. So
Yes.
thank you for your service.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the thing was, and, I talk a lot about, what transpired at that moment in time as we're dealing with, the fact that my insurance company was slow to pay my oncologist, and, me having to try to figure out how do I come up with $10,000 to kind of pacify the situation, in order to alleviate buying me more time so that either A, I can get the VA on board, or B, I can get my primary healthcare insurance, which I won't name, to get their act together, So there was a lot of juggling going on, and excuse me, the navigation of that, as I look back on it, which we describe very well in the book, is something that, I just think everyone has to kind of understand and prepare, because a lot of times, we think we're prepared, maybe we think we have enough life insurance, or we think we have enough money in the bank, or we have enough assets or something like that. But the reality of it is when you are not wealthy and you're not poor, the likelihood of you being able to deal with something like this out of your own pocket would certainly put you in a situation of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And so, you have to be very creative in, like my wife and I talked about, she said, maybe we need to apply for some grants. Maybe we need to apply for aid and funding and this, that, and the other. And of course, even going through some of those processes, they don't really look at the fact of where you are today. They want to look at like, okay, what'd you make on your tax return last year? And I'm like, what does that matter what I made on my tax return last year? Because I'm broke right now. I'm not even working. I have no income. I mean, what do you not understand? Yeah. Exactly. And so, fighting all those battles, was just, it was taxing. It was really taxing. At night I would go to bed knowing that I not only was in pain, but mentally just drained from all of the explanation and trying to, connect doctors to, grants, or connect doctors to funding so they could transfer my records and do this and do that. It was just, it was appalling. But finally, after, having all of this resiliency build up to a head, even though the VA had denied me, the one thing that I did utilize was the fact that I was back in the government system, which I had been out of the government system because I left the military, I don't know, probably 20 some odd years ago, and never used any of the benefits besides my GI Bill. And so once I got my VA card saying that, hey, you have a veteran ID again, and so forth and so on, I got wise. I said, okay, the system doesn't want to work with me, then I'm going to work the system. And so what I ended up doing is I just scheduled an appointment with the standard PCP, and I managed to get into the VA hospital to a primary health care doctor, which they try and run a physical when they first see you. They take blood, they do all these things to check you out, see how healthy you are. And I told him, I said, look, we can do all those things, but here's all of my records from my oncologist that says I have multiple myeloma, and the VA's already denied me. And my doctor said, whoa, wait a minute. He said, really? I said, yeah, really. So we sat down and we explained to him. I said, I'm on treatment. This is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. I said, my insurance company's giving me a hard time. I'm like, I really need the VA's help. And at that point, that first doctor referred me on to the oncology hematology department in the VA. And then from there, we met two doctors. And one of those doctors, which I won't mention any names, was a godsend, because at the point he met us with all of my records while we were talking with the other hematologist, oncologist that was there in our consultation, he said, we can help you. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, okay, this is the first time someone's even mentioned those words to us. And he said, now I want you to know that, remember all those tests you went through? He's like, you're going to have to go back through all that again, because even though we believe, outside physicians, we have to have it done by our, labs and physicians and so forth and so on. So literally I went back through all of that horrific stuff again. And it was just like, okay, you know what, whatever it takes, because at the end of the day, I can't be thinking about this as a sprint, because it's really a marathon. It's an ultra marathon. We're talking about my life here. So we went through all of that stuff again. We're staying in contact as I'm fighting my insurance company. Finally, my insurance company paid. But then in November, my insurance company sends me a letter. And what I'm going to express to you right now was like driving a stake through my wife and I, because the letter stated, Mr. Proctor, you have hit your ceiling. And I'm thinking to myself, my ceiling? I paid you $15,000 as a deductible. I don't owe you anything. You should be picking up all of my costs. This is not, the renewal process for my insurance. It's not the end of the year. This is not January 1. We are like in August. And I'm like, I'm looking at this letter and I'm going, what is going on? So I call up my case manager that's working with the insurance company. And I'm like, please help me understand. He's like, well, if you go to page such and such in our 100-page document and, it says this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And I just said, you know what? For $1,100 a month, I've never been ill, not even a broken bone in my entire life. And I'm like, this is how you guys do me. I'm like, okay. I was like, this will be the last time this ever happens to me. And so I said, well, what does this mean? They said, well, since you've hit your ceiling, you've been approved for your stem cell transplant. However, you have to do it in one of these hospitals. And if you have any complications, of course, the letter didn't say this, but this is what the letter meant. If you have any complications after you are discharged from your stem cell transplant, well, that cost will be on you. And I said to myself, are you setting me up here? I mean, because this is crazy. So that happened in August and September. We went through October and of course, like November, we're still pushing the VA to try to, move things forward. And I'll have to say, when we talk about miracles happening, and I mean literally miracles happening, because my wife and I were in such financial distraught. I mean, we were doing everything and, selling a coin collection. I sold one of my life insurance policies. We were just putting ourselves in survival mode, basically saying like, okay, you know what? We're going to do what we have to do. I mean, it's just really come down to that, because I couldn't work. I mean, it's just like no physical way for me to work. So when that miracle came about on December the 10th, 2021, is a day I'll never, ever forget. One of the doctors that we had met that had started all of the application process and everything that had transpired through the VA called me up and he said, you should be getting a letter in the mail, but I want to reach out to you first and foremost and let you know you've been approved. And not only will we take care of your primary coverage today, meaning all of my treatment that I was enduring, but we're also going to cover 100% of your stem cell transplant, and we will cover all of your maintenance care, because maintenance care is something that I'm going to be on for quite some time throughout my life in order to keep the cancer abated. And that was a hallelujah moment, because what I'm about to tell you now is it was just something that, couldn't have happened without all of these miracles or all these blessings occurring the way that they did. I mean, they were within a timely fashion. So we received the letter, and basically, reading the letter, took it into my oncology, took it all of my doctors and said, okay, you know what? This commercial insurance company I'm dealing with, okay, they are now secondary because from this point forward, I don't want to hear about you got a bill, you got this, you got that, because it was already difficult to deal with. Some of the things they would cover, some of the things they wouldn't cover, a couple $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there. And, we're just trying to pull money out of the air, to be able to kind of manage all of this. So as December rolled around, COVID was still going on and really kind of at a peak, here in San Antonio. And as I was getting ready to start, all of my engagement with my stem cell transplant, my doctors were saying to me, we're going to have to be a little fluid in being able to get you in for your stem cell transplant, primarily because we're going to kill your immune system. And with the COVID numbers being as high as they are, we cannot have you vulnerable without any protection, because people are going to be in and out of your hospital room. There's going to be nurses and physicians, and, we just have to really exercise as much precaution as possible. So we missed the opportunity at the end of 2021 for me to have my stem cell transplant. And we actually started the overall process in 2022. And so I went into the hospital like on February 7th. They introduced a high dose of melphalan, which is kind of standard practice where literally they kill off your immune system, kill off all of your cells, and you are basically sitting about as vulnerable as you can be. You just pray nobody has a cold, bacteria, or sneeze, because you really don't need that at that point in time of your life. So they gave me 24-hour period to rest. And on the 9th is when I had my stem cell transplant, February the 9th, which is kind of my rebirth date that occurred. And so I went from the 9th up until about the 21st, about 12 days in the hospital. And since I was actually doing fairly well, despite all of the things that happen when you go through a stem cell transplant, because your body does a lot of crazy things, which I won't go into detail about. But I was released on the 20th or 21st, came home. My wife has this checklist of things that she has to do. And one of them being check my temperature, every so often. I was like every 2 hours or 3 hours, to make sure I'm not running a fever. So we're sitting eating. She's checking my temperature. She's looking at me. She's like, you feel okay? And I'm like, well, yeah, I think so. She checks my temperature again, and she's like starting to freak out. I can see it all in her eyes. And I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, well, I need to go get the other thermometer, the baby thermometer, and kind of put it underneath your armpit, because the laser thermometer, you're not even reading. That's the temperature. You're saying your body temperature is off the scale. She goes and gets the baby thermometer, and basically it pegs out. And she looks at me and she says, okay, stop what you're doing, and we are going back to the hospital right now. This was 14 hours later. So remember I said earlier that my insurance company, my commercial insurance company, had already said, if you have any complications, even though they didn't say that specifically, if you have any complications, well, we can't cover you. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, so here we go. I spent like the next 8 consecutive days in the hospital. Every single test that they could run, known to man, was done to me to check for bacterial, viral, you name it, infections, everything. I just went through it all. I mean, I felt like a pincushion by the time they were all done. I mean, it was just like, okay, guys, what else can you do to me? Which you're only going to come back and tell me it's been inconclusive, because every time they ran a test, well, that's inconclusive. We don't know what it is. And my wife and I kept saying, because at this point, we're well educated on the disease. However, since I had, what they call an autologous stem cell transplant, where I use my own stem cells, it wasn't allogenic, where I use someone else's stem cells. What we told my doctors is, are you guys sure it's not engraftment syndrome? And engraftment syndrome, which I'm just going to explain very simply, is where your stem cells they begin to re-impregnate themselves back into your bone marrow. Because when they put your stem cells back into your body, they're in your bloodstream. And of course, your body's reacting in a different way because it's like, hey, your stem cells are supposed to be in your bone marrow. They should not be in your bloodstream. And so all of these things that your body's doing, assuming that it's fighting off infections or bacterial or diseases, that's what your body's enduring during this whole period. And so I have, gone through all these series of tests. Every day we're asking the same thing. Are you guys sure it's not engraftment syndrome? So the doctors are coming in and are like, we have to go through the protocol. It's like, okay. So by the 8th day after every single test, and I don't even remember how many they ran. I know it was definitely more than 20 tests. Every single test came back inconclusive. They finally said on the 8th day, if you can keep your fever down, then we're going to release you because we believe it's engraftment syndrome.
Oh, the system.
So I mean, yeah, it's very comical, but here's the thing here was another surreal moment. Those 8 days and all of the tests that they ran totaled about $850,000. So if the VA wouldn't have been on time, my insurance company would have left me high and dry.
Yep.
And my wife and I certainly would have been in a much worse shape than anyone can ever imagine with kind of that much debt coming down upon us. And we've been fortunate, and grateful, to be in the situation that we're in right now, because I mean, we're less than, I don't know, maybe like $100,000 that, we're trying to, weather ourselves through. But to have, a much larger number be a part of that equation is not something that, I would want to wish upon anybody.
Oh my God, no. Well, divine timing. I believe in it totally. And it sounds like God was there for you at every point that you needed him to be. And, hallelujah, praise God that you are where you are right now. And, I know we're running a little longer than we usually do, but what a story. And we appreciate you sharing it with us. You probably got a question for it.
Yeah. I'd like to know where people can get your book.
That's right. They need to get all the details.
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon, audiobook, not audiobook, excuse me, ebook, paperback, and hardback, and it's also available on Barnes and Nobles. I think recently we were in Walmart and Target and a few others. I mean, so just about every distribution channel, I believe, we should be able to purchase the book. And the paperback, I think, is like $18.99. And the hardback is $21.99. And if you search Faith, Strength, and Courage, or, if you decide to search just by my name, Gregory O. Proctor, on your Barnes & Noble or Amazon or wherever you buy your books, you should be able to find it. Absolutely.
Awesome. And it is Faith, Strength, and Courage. I don't know that we even said that before, so we want to make sure people know
Faith, Strength, and Courage. Faith,
Do you
Strength,
have
and
a
Courage.
copy of the book right there?
Yeah, see has a copy of his book.
Show,
Hold
so
that
people
up
can
again.
see it.
There you go.
Absolutely. There you go. Faith, Strength, and Courage.
Yeah, some devil there.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Wow. Well, thank you so much for blessing us here. Oh, you have something else?
Yes.
Oh.
How can people get hold of you?
Yeah, if they want to reach out to you.
Yes.
Well, I always tell people now, because I didn't really share this, but I can try to summarize it here in a short period of time. I always tell people, one, I'm not hard to find, and two, since I have been, I've been affiliated with so many pharmaceutical companies that develop drugs for multiple myeloma. I've also been, a patient advocate for a lot of them, as well as a spokesperson, and been on many different podcasts, webinars, keynotes that I provided. And here in San Antonio, I used to be the first and only adult honored hero for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which is something that they typically never do because it's always about kids. And so this past year in 2023, they brought me in, because they felt like, hey, I could add a little bit more to their funding, raise, and donation capacity, having an adult that, funders and donatees could actually can talk to. So I've done a lot of great work in raising awareness and advocation and really just being a beacon of hope. And that started about 2 years ago. And so when I say I'm not hard to find, literally, if you go put in Gregory O. Proctor on Google, I'm sure that you'll find a lot of things out there about me, probably more about the book now than a lot of my other endeavors, because like I said, there's a lot of things going on regarding my book. But yeah, I'm not hard to find. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, pretty much all of your social media channels. I tend to basically, continue to share my story, continue to advocate, continue to try to, be a voice of reasoning for those that don't have a voice, and really be in a situation to where I can kind of cultivate change. Because a lot of times, on the side of, and I'm going to be very honest with our males, sometimes we don't want to go see the doctor, and, not having those routine checks and things that are very important, they could be, the saving grace between, circumstances that could be prevented early on and caught early on, or, something that, you may have to deal with over a long period of time, which I highly recommend, certainly doing the things you need to do to keep yourself healthy. Because for me, the diagnosis not only humbled me, but certainly it required me to look at life 180 degrees out from the direction that I was living before. And what do I mean by that? It's diet, exercise, healthy eating, spirituality. I mean, you name it. I've literally adopted that as a part of my day-to-day routine, because, it is needed in order to keep me alive.
Absolutely. And, I'm grateful that you're including that spiritual piece, because I am sure that the good Lord is guiding your path to be able to be that patient advocate, to be that educator, and to share your story in more places. So we thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your story here. And we wish you many blessings and all kinds of good things coming your way.
Thank both of you. I mean, I certainly have enjoyed it. Appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to collaborating again.
All right.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gregory. And thanks all our listeners with You Are the Miracle podcast. We'll see you again next week. And I believe our friend Tanya Debnam's going to be with us next week. Yeah. All right.
She's fantastic.
She is. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.